Hello everyone, Alan Sens here, and welcome to this segment on Arms Control Challenges, Iran Part 2. In this segment, we're going to look at the Iran deal, what it is, what has happened to it, and what the prospects might be. So let's get started. By the time we're done, you should be able to describe the Joint Combined Plan of Action, JCPOA, or as it is informally known, the Iran deal. Okay, so the backstory to the Iran deal lies in a set of negotiations that took place for around 2 years and yielded something called the 2013 Joint Plan of Action. Those negotiations were between Iran and the so-called P5+1. The P5+1 were the 5 UN Security Council permanent members, so that's the United States, UK, France, China, Russia, and then the +1 part is Germany. Those talks have been going on for a while, and on 24 November 2013, the talks yielded an interim deal. And the interim deal was called the Joint Action Plan of the Geneva Interim Agreement. So from these origins, then, on 14th July 2014, the P5+1 talks yielded the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, or the Iran deal. The signatories to the Iran deal were China, France, Germany, the European Union, Iran, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Okay, so what was the Iran deal all about? What was the JCPOA? What were its provisions? So the first set of core provisions in the deal dealt with enrichment, specifically Iran's enrichment capability. Under the terms of the JCPOA, Iran is restricted for 10 years to 5,000 centrifuges to conduct the enrichment of low-enriched uranium only at the Natanz facility. They are restricted to a ceiling of 3.67% of the fissile isotope U-235. So this is enough for civilian reactor operation and research and so on, but obviously isn't enough for weapons-grade uranium. Now, Iran has over 19,000 centrifuges, so 14,000 of them under the JCPOA will be stored under the supervision of UN inspectors. Those inspectors will be from the International Atomic Energy Agency. Also, 1,000 centrifuges will be allowed at the Fordow site for medical isotope production and limited research and development. But no uranium itself is allowed at the Fordow facility. So those were the enrichment provisions, very much designed to zero in, if you like, on all of the international concern about Iran enriching uranium to weapons grade. As for fissile materials, or the next basket of provisions inside the JCPOA, Iran's nuclear stockpile by this time was actually quite large. The stockpile of low-enriched uranium was estimated at around 10,000 to 12,000 kilograms. And under the provisions of the JCPOA, that will be reduced by 98% to 300 kilograms, and it'll be required to stay at 300 kilograms for 15 years. This 15-year piece, by the way, that was the source of quite a bit of the criticism behind the Iran deal. We'll come to that in a moment. In addition, the Iraq reactor will have its central core redesigned and changed to reduce plutonium output, and plutonium will be shipped out of Iran. So this provision then takes the plutonium produced by the Iranian nuclear cycle and actually physically removes it from the country, so Iran does not have access to it for a possible nuclear weapons program. Furthermore, Iran agreed to 15 years of no reprocessing to recover plutonium from spent fuel, and the commitment, if you like, that it still does not intend to reprocess after that period. Again, this was another source of criticism. Okay, the next basket of components within the JCPOA concerned verification. Now, obviously, verification is crucial, right? So the international community wants confidence that Iran is actually living up to its obligations. So Iran, under the JCPOA, accepted the IAEA Additional Protocol, an early declaration of nuclear-related construction, and 24-hour access to nuclear sites. Iran also accepted monitoring of its entire uranium nuclear fuel cycle, from mines to spent fuel, for 25 years. Centrifuge manufacture will be subject to IAEA monitoring and inspection, and nuclear-related imports will be monitored and controlled. The IAEA also has access to sites through a managed process and enforced by sanctions resumption if necessary. So a lot of this verification package was insisted on by the P5+1 in order to give them some confidence that Iran would be abiding by the provisions of the JCPOA and that they could verify that. Then there were the sanctions themselves. Now, a UN Security Council resolution passed July 20th, 2015, provided that should any violation of the agreement be raised, and should the United Nations Security Council within 30 days fail to take action regarding that question, there would be an automatic resumption in force of all previous UN nuclear sanctions against Iran. Now, this is a little bit of a sort of a dead hand trigger. The concern was that one of the permanent 5 members of the Security Council might have a change of heart about the JCPOA and block future efforts to punish Iran for transgressions. So essentially what this provision amounts to is the automatic resumption of sanctions if the Security Council or a member of the Security Council or a member of the P5+1 deal raise any issues with respect to the violation of the agreement. It is estimated that Iran will get access to about $50 billion of money in foreign banks and Iranian assets upon sanctions termination. Of course, this was the big carrot for Iran and a big motive for Iran. Under the sanctions regime, its economy had suffered. A lot of its foreign assets were frozen, and so the JCPOA promised to release those assets and end the sanctions. That was what Iran got in return for the inspections, the verification, the enrichment provisions of the JCPOA. So initially, both sides met the terms of the JCPOA. That up there, little mistake. That should be JCPOA, so spelling error. Anyway, Tehran did neutralize its stockpile of enriched uranium. It also allowed inspections to come into the country, kept its stockpile of 5% enriched uranium capped, and did not install any new centrifuges, no new equipment or fuel rods at the Arak research reactor. Washington, meanwhile, released $4.2 billion of frozen Iranian oil sale assets and granted other sanctions relief worth about $2 to $3 billion. So for a period, the deal seemed to be going ahead, and everyone agreed that Iran was abiding by its commitments. However, there was a lot of criticism and opposition to the deal. Opponents of the deal argued that the JCPOA permitted Iran to retain key fissile material processing capacities. Because these reprocessing capacities were not destroyed or eliminated, it meant that at some point in the future, Iran could restart its nuclear weapons program. Second, a lot of critics say that Iran will therefore have the ability to cheat or break out of the agreement on very short notice. Third, a lot of critics said the timeline is too short. Periods such as 15 years or 25 years were simply too short, that the deal should have been extended for a longer period of time. And then finally, many critics argued that by ending sanctions, it meant that Iran would have more resources, more money to spend on efforts around the Middle East that were regarded as destabilizing by the critics and by many other countries, both in the Middle East and abroad. So for all these reasons, there was a fairly powerful critique of the JCPOA. It was very political. There was a lot of polarity, especially in the United States, surrounding the deal, with a lot of people arguing that it was a bad arrangement. Advocates of the deal, in contrast, said, look, we've managed to reinstate inspections. We've managed to get Iran to agree to cap those activities that could lead to the development of a nuclear weapon. And we've provided for the ability for Iran to become more of a partner in the region and perhaps more of a trading country in the future as well. It's not perfect, said the advocates, but within the framework of Iran's nuclear proliferation ambitions, this is a very good deal. It's a very good arrangement. So you had this tension in the United States and in Europe around whether or not the deal was a good one or not. And then along comes President Trump. And of course, here, the president during the election campaign strongly criticized the deal as a bad deal, as he put it, and that he would get a better deal. So the president was under some pressure to backtrack on the arrangement. And on October 13th, 2017, President Trump did in fact announce that he was decertifying Iran and the Iran deal. Now, this is a domestic U.S. situation. This has got nothing to do with the JCPOA directly. The U.S. legislation, the U.S. law that approved of the JCPOA and of American participation in the JCPOA is called the U.S.-Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act. And that act requires the President of the United States to certify that Iran is in compliance with the JCPOA, and that certification has to be made every 90 days. And so Trump, already a critic of the deal, and supported by elements within the United States that argued that the deal was a bad deal, decertified the Iran deal. He argued that Iran was not in compliance with the JCPOA. This is despite the fact that the United States' own intelligence agencies had provided reports to the effect that Iran was, in effect, in compliance with the JCPOA. And then further, the Trump administration on May 8th, 2018, announced the withdrawal of the United States from the JCPOA and the reinstatement of sanctions against Iran. So now you have one of the signatories of the JCPOA withdrawing from the agreement. In the sort of diplomatic shock that followed, the other signatories to the JCPOA pledged to continue operating under the terms of the JCPOA, as did Iran. And so the big question now moving forward is the JCPOA going to survive? Can it survive without American support? And if it does survive, what's that going to look like? And does pulling out of the JCPOA by the United States, does that create the conditions for the possible collapse of the agreement and a return to the crisis days of the period before 2013, 14, and 15? No one really knows, and that's kind of where we're at this point. Okay, so now you should be able to describe the Joint Combined Plan of Action, the JCPOA, or as we simply call it, the Iran deal. So obviously there was a period of great crisis and tension, a diplomatic arrangement that seemed to be working, and then with the American withdrawal from the JCPOA, we're now back into a period of uncertainty. And this just illustrates how vitally important motive is, how significant politics are when it comes to the ability to grapple with the technical issues related to nuclear non-proliferation. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll see you again soon.